He's out of town. He's at a conference.
Right. He's on his boat in the middle of it.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending and making time to come so we could give you an overview of the revisions that we made. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about the different documents that are in front of you, and then just talk about list order that we're going to go over, and then we'll kick it off from there. So at your place, you've got a copy of the agenda that includes meeting in a box review. That's that worksheet that we looked at last time, as well as the public engagement scope and methodology. So the agenda behind that is the minutes, and then you've got the actual meeting in a box worksheet that's been edited with the changes that we talked about, and that was sent to you ahead of time. And then you've got a one-page summary that was provided by Civic Brand. It's basically a list of the type and number of engagement activities that are going to be included in the public engagement process. Yes, ma'am. Yes. And so I think this will help provide just some additional detail about the things to come. And then behind that is a summary, an overview of the various tactics that are going to be utilized during the engagement process. And we're going to go over that in more detail. I just kind of want to give you an idea of the different documents that are in front of you and the order that we're going to go over them. And so we've actually what we're going to do is we're going to distribute the electronic version of these last two documents to the committees and our boards and some council and our community group, and try to get that messaging out to as many people as we can. So, all right, any questions before we jump into me? No? Like I said, oh yeah, go ahead.
Councilman Huckabee, excuse me, are you there?
Yes,
Okay, can you hear Elena and can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine in the back, and I'm pretty sure I can hear Elena just fine.
Okay, well, I'm farthest away, so we were just making sure you could hear this end of the room.
Yep, all good from my end. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Elena.
Okay, I'm also going to pull up those additional documents that I mentioned because I didn't send them out via email ahead of time, and I want to make sure Chad can take a look at them. So let me just pull them up here.
Yes, thank you for doing that, Elena.
Okay, thank you. I am. Okay. Right, and so what I'm going to do, Chad, is I'm going to share my screen. Oh, 25. All right, Chad, can you see this document that I have open? Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Okay. So, based on the consensus that we heard at our meeting on October 30th, we sent that feedback to Civic Brand, and what they did essentially was they added some generic question boxes to each of the categories. So for anything that the public wanted to say on that topic, in addition to the questions that were provided. They also provided a general follow-up section where people can just add any topic that they're passionate about, or that they want to make sure that the consultant team is aware of. And that section also includes a space for people to add emails from people who are in attendance in the meetings if they want to be notified about future surveys. One thing I did want to mention before we get too far into the individual questions, because I know Kathleen wants to talk about that, is that we're still very much in the initial engagement phase of this process. And so we haven't started any of those planned engagement activities that are included in the scope. Like, we haven't started any of the focus groups or the surveys or any of those public events that are outlined. And so I think some of the concerns that we heard last time are valid because we haven't pushed a lot of that stuff out yet. But I think they're a little bit premature. In hindsight, I think we should have waited to publish this meeting in a box document until the focus groups and the surveys were launched. But I think we didn't anticipate some of the delays that we've seen, we kind of pushed back when we were gonna issue the surveys and public events, we closer to the end of summer, so the students could come back. And so I think, looking back, we probably should have waited until some of those other things were out before we published this, because this is really meant to be kind of icing on the cake, extra engagement for people who aren't gonna participate in the surveys and who aren't gonna come to the public meetings. Not like the public engagement. And I think that's what it's been viewed as, which I don't blame people because that's all that's out there right now. And so that's, something that we talked about internally. Looking back, we should have kind of held off on this until some of the other stuff was out. So I just wanted to kind of make a general statement about that. But there's going to be lots of surveys, focus groups, things that are really meant to be the main focus. And this is really meant to supplement all those other things. And so I just wanted to provide that clarification statement up front. Does anyone have any questions about that?
No, you kind of thinking maybe the focus groups and things might have informed what some of the questions might have been, maybe?
Well, no, not necessarily. No, we're going to talk about that because at the back, we have a process overview that's got the number and types of surveys, the topics that are going to be included.
Okay,
So we're about to launch the first survey, our first survey in August, which will be a community visioning survey. And it'll include a lot of those questions that you guys talked about that were missing from this document. And so I think if you guys want to, we can move the order of things. We can look at those first before we get into this. I think it'll help clarify some of that.
Elena, you should go through this one because it'll
Okay.
make it easier to understand what you're saying.
I think so too. I think so too. Yeah.
To kind of answer, I think where you're headed that way.
Okay.
Hold on a second, Elena. So to answer that a little bit more. This wasn't intended to then influence other questions. This was intended to serve the purpose that it was written for. Because there are other parts of this whole engagement process that serve those purposes. As you know, we can't have a survey that covers every single thing that everybody in this room wants to talk about.
Right.
But we have individual pieces that talk about your concerns, and Kurt's concerns, and my concerns. You can't have one document that you hand to Mario, but here's 100 pages. Give the answers, right?
Yeah, this document was not intended or designed to target specific groups or be a visioning document. That wasn't the intent of it. And so I think kind of did they say a little out of order. So thanks, Brian. Let's go ahead and start with that. So this is yeah, sure, go ahead.
And these came up last. You said the first survey was going to be launched.
Mhm.
And that's the initial surveys, 10 by consultant, 5 by staff. Is that what we're talking?
Yeah, so that's that. And so we're gonna go over that. That's a community visioning survey. And
Less than your.
Yeah.
The questions for that survey, and this was asked last time. The questions for that survey, they were developed by the consultants and staff.
they were developed by the consultants and then staff reviews them, make sure they don't have too much jargon, right? Make sure they're like easy to understand. They're in terms that people can, use on a normal basis. They're reviewed by the executive staff team. So Brian takes a look at them, Larissa takes a look at them, Steve Bartlett takes a look at them to make sure that, they're accurate, that they are specific to NacTogether. And then they finalize that and then essentially it gets published. So that first one has a lot of questions and a lot of, some of them are kind of broad questions. And the idea is that based on that feedback, then they'll narrow and kind of do a deeper dive into some of those questions. But you want to start off with kind of a broad overview that's still specific to NacTogether, but captures as much kind of commentary and input as you can, and then you can start to kind of narrow that conversation and discussion further, if that makes sense. And so,
Okay.
does that make sense?
as we discussed last time, was there any consideration of having the steering committee and the downtown committee take a look at the survey questions before they vote?
Well, they haven't been launched yet, but they're about to be. And to answer your question, no. And I think Civic Brand talked to you guys about this when they were here last time. You have to be careful when you're trying to design by committee because you're never gonna satisfy everyone. And it can make the process so lengthy, and tenuous that it's just difficult to manage.
I understand
so
that, but it can
that's-
also make the process work better by getting more input from people. Because now we're back on these because essentially the steering committee didn't see these before the meeting. And now there's questions about them. So my question is, when the surveys launch, are there going to be questions from the steering committee about questions in the survey? And I've served on lots of strategic planning committees. And to be honest with you, I've never seen a situation in which a steering committee has not been consulted about survey questions or focus group questions or interview questions. Ever. I've never been in a situation where that happened. I mean, maybe it does, but I've never been in that situation.
Well, it's Larry, and I'm on the outside, I'm very sorry with Jessica because she's enjoying reading the book by swimming pool on vacation. So she was like, hey, continue to go in there. So I'm not speaking with as much knowledge as she does or Lana does. But from what I understand, the desire, we have two council members, you can correct me on this one as well, for the steering committees in this process was not necessarily the detail of question writing, question analysis, but it's to aid in gathering data from the public with the questions and with the tools that the consultants are providing to us at the committees.
So,
I don't
well,
think
let
that's
me
why we're
answer,
here.
let me answer the
Okay,
council
if we can
person.
disagree, that's why I'm just saying that was what I was remembering. So
So as a council person, the steering committees are designed to steer, to actually guide to, and whatever these questions are, which I haven't seen, council hasn't seen, and none of us have seen, are guiding this process. So it's kind of a little backwards for me. And I have also served on a million things, and I've designed questionnaires, and you have too, Paul, and I know Betty Shin has been part of, I mean, a lot of us have done this kind of thing. Whatever is asked is at the heart of what it is we want to learn. So if the steering committee isn't involved in whatever is asked, we're missing the heart of the guidance. So that's really the question. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, is being involved in what is being asked. And you're saying this is not the main thing, but the thing coming up is the main thing. And if we haven't seen that, how you ask a question, what topics are in there, that is the heart of a comprehensive plan.
I do see it a little differently because we are a volunteer steering committee and we may not have the expertise that this civic brand engagement or DTJ to use in our committee, since we are a volunteer. We are spending hours of our time as public citizens, which, it's a lot of hours. It's running, it's a lot of hours. And I think that I am relying on the people that we've hired to use best practices and common practices in urban city design, whatever have you. And I'm trusting that process as a citizen with limited bandwidth and hours to do this process. I don't envision myself writing surveys or really doing boots on the ground, door to door soliciting. I think this, the way this is done is efficient, effective, and again, they're following best practices that I may not have the knowledge of to steer a process in.
Well, I have to question whether it's best practice or not. Because I've worked with many consultants on many strategic plans. And I've never been in a situation where the consultants solely wrote the survey questions and the steering committee didn't even look at the survey questions before they were distributed, ever. That's not in my experience. And I've been a volunteer on every strategic plan I've ever worked on. And this is just foreign to me. And serving on a steering committee in the strategic planning process means what it means, steering committee. And if you're totally just meeting to look at what has been done, that's not really steering it, that's just looking at what other people have done.
I think we've got a stopgap here. We have the staff from the city. It's gonna be providing input, additional staff, and that would be for us to provide input to the staff, so they.
Yeah, so we have an input spot ahead of time. Right.
They're getting input from the staff about the questions, Dr. Sullivan. Based on, all the-
Just like from the last meeting, Elena and Jessica relayed we would like to see topics on X, Y, and Z that came out of this meeting. I wasn't here, but I watched it. That information was relayed from this body to city staff and then staff back to the consultants, which is kind of.
Kind of like, I've seen the same things. I mean, I don't want it to become like a lot more cumbersome and be kind of run by a whole committee, because I know how things get bogged down. And I think these are professionals that know how to write questions, but I think as they write their questions, it wouldn't hurt for us to have a look at the questions. Give us a few days, say, see something missing or something that's not good or not right, send it to us. And then as professionals, y'all can look at what our suggestions are as people who lived in this town all this time. And maybe, oh, that's a good suggestion, but you know what, it just won't fit in here. Thanks for sending it to me, we'll put it in something later. I get that, that's fine. I'm not gonna, no, my part has to be in there. But just so that so that the people writing it and y'all and the DTJ kind of have a little bit of input from what we would think. So maybe just send it to us, give us a few days to look it over and if we see something glaring or something we hate or something we love, and just let them know. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
And I will
We
say.
don't have our feelings hurt by it, but at least we'll know that they look at that stuff.
I will say that Jessica has been very good about scheduling opportunities for us to revise our thinking, to share additional thinking. But again, those are additional meetings. And again, the committee is busy at work in different capacities, but y'all have given great opportunities to meet again a couple of times to revise and review and share our thoughts in different ways. So I think that's fair and equitable.
And I think one of the points that you brought up to me is an important point. And that is the consultants are consultants. They don't live here.
Right.
And in every organization that I've done strategic planning meeting, the consultants were not part of that organization, they were outside of the organization. And they really don't have the full context nor the full picture of what's going on.
Right. They have lots of expertise books. Sorry. Sorry.
They have,
Sorry, you guys. I just got a new motor on my wheelchair, and if I touch the button, it goes. And I keep getting it, and I'm sorry. It's okay. Right, I'm gonna keep my hand on the table.
If they were living in this community and part of this community or the organization, I think they have a place in that. But consultants are consultants in the product. They're there to advise and provide some advice and consultation.
Some expertise.
Their expertise, but they're not there to tell you exactly what your strategic plan should be. Because they don't know, because they don't know the organization, they don't know the community.
Yeah.
They can, say, hey, you should look at this, you should look at that. But in the end, it has to be the people in the community and it has to be the people in the organization that say, no, this is what is important to us.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to really pay attention to. Because the folks from the outside don't know and they can't know, really.
And that's a lot of the information they gather from the surveys.
Right.
I mean, so I'm
Or
agreeing,
not.
I'm agreeing with you. I mean, 100%.
Or not, yeah,
Or not,
from the
or not,
survey,
that's
as Kathleen pointed out.
Right. Or
It's
not.
because the questions that they're asked in the survey will determine the outcomes.
I'm not disagreeing with you all. I'm saying, yes, you're right, is that the consultants don't write the survey. It is the input from the whole.
They did write the survey.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, not survey, the plan. I said the wrong word.
Yeah.
It would
Well,
not-
and that's another question that I had after our last meeting is, who was going to write this one in the end? You know, where do the words come from that go on the piece of paper that comes to plan?
The consultants use the information that they gathered to write.
So they write the plan.
But
And again,
basically,
let me explain my experience, and I've been in multiple, again.
yeah, well, I'm doing, I don't want to interrupt you, so I'm letting you finish your sentence, and then I'll try to provide some.
I've been through multiple strategic planning processes in multiple organizations, both volunteer organizations and professional organizations and organizations. And I've never been in one where the consultants wrote. The final words that went on the paper were always the words that came from the people on the steering. Subcommittees wrote those elements of the strategic plan. It was never the words of the consultants that were on the page, ever. So if that's the process that we're using, that is a process that I'm not familiar with, and frankly, I'm not.
So, I'm just gonna provide some commentary, then I'm gonna ask Kurt what he thinks, I'm gonna ask Chad for some feedback too. But, I've worked on multiple comp plans, worked with committees, these types of committees who work on those plans. These committees are meant to be representative of the community. And so as the consultant, who are the paid professionals who have expertise in city planning, they will take the data that they've collected, commentary received from the application process, and draft these plans, write these reports, present them to the committees, and then the committee serves as a sounding board to say, hey, you know what, yeah, that makes sense. No, we don't agree with any of that. You're way off, you're way off base. That's not a priority for the city. And so what you're steering is really the content, and I think the meat and potatoes of the plan, the recommendations, the values, the objectives, those things that come forward that really are the direction of the future and the direction of the city. That's like, those are the things that you're really steering and driving, the vision, the objectives, the goals, not serving necessarily as project managers where you're taking the work that we hired a consultant to do and editing it for quality control. That's not really
Okay,
based
well,
on the, but
I do need to, so if you look at this process as like a three-legged stool, okay? You have the consultant and they have a bunch of expertise and they have expertise in writing, but they're not here. And we have the staff who has a lot of expertise and their specific expertise but their staff. And then you have the steering committees over here. Each one has a part to play. But this isn't managing to say, what are the questions we're missing, to actually look at it and say, is this really what we want to ask? Do we want to ask some more things? As long as we're asking every person in the city, we're missing some things. I saw some things really have holes in what we're missing on there.
and again, this is not meant to
Okay,
be
I
a
haven't seen the other ones. so I
comprehensive,
can't-
exactly. You haven't seen the other ones because we haven't published them, but they
But you're
are,
telling me I'm not.
extensive and they're much more than this. It covers housing, it covers
Let
quality of
me-
life, it covers
Let me
facilities
finish my
infrastructure.
point here.
Okay.
My point is, this is not a technical part. This is the heart of what we want to ask the people of Nacogdoches. So the steering committees should have a part, not necessarily say put an and or a the, but wait a minute, we're missing this whole thing, or we need to add this part, or we need to, if we're gonna ask all of our people, let's ask them about this. So there is a spot early on to help steer the questions, which then will get the answers. I don't know if that makes sense, but no, I don't think anybody's saying, we need to have technical or whatever. It's there is meat. I'm sorry. I ran off.
Okay, well, I know you wanted to hear from them too, Kurt, and Kurt, so I'll let. What do you think?
Well, I appreciate that you're, want to hear my input, Elena. And, I guess it just kind of trying to take all of this that I'm hearing and put it in some kind of, usable context. I completely understand where Larry's coming from, and I completely understand where Kathleen's coming from. And I understand where you're coming from, and I think that the fact that the meeting in the box was presented to us as a tool, and the steering, both downtown and comprehensive steering committees didn't really know if that was going to be the primary driving force or if that was going to be a supplemental force, which you've explained that now, Elena, and I appreciate that. And I see it a little bit differently, but the fact of the matter still remains that there were some holes maybe missing in the meeting in the box questions. And so I would say that that's been remedied by the suggestion of adding the all-inclusive box at the end of each section, and then at the end of the total document, if there's anything else missing, you've got that opportunity for speak now or forever hold your peace. And so I would just suggest that in the other areas of this process, my suggestion would be to DTJ to make sure that they create those opportunities in all of this process for anything and other that's not included. And at least if that's done, if every step of this process is handled with that, hopefully if something is missing, if a question is not asked correctly or there's a question missing, or if a question is misleading or whatever the case, at least that all-inclusive context could capture that. And I would be more than happy. I'd be more than happy as DTJ prepares these components and presents this to us. I'd be more than happy to receive an email ahead of these meetings and have the opportunity to review that on my own and be a little bit more familiar with it before the meeting. That way I could probably ask better structured questions of where they're going with what they're going. That really hasn't been the case up to this point, and maybe there's a good and well reason for that. I'm sure as professionals, they have their logic and their reasoning behind structuring the process the way they do. But I would say that at least with this group, there's some of us who are pretty passionate about being able to see this material ahead of time before it becomes hard ink. And so to me, that's just a glaring suggestion that maybe they could help provide this process, the information in this process to us, feed it to us a little up front where we could have a chance to take a look at it. So anyhow, does that make any sense at all, or is that clear as mud? Or
It does. No, it does. And I'm going to make a suggestion,
okay.
but I want to hear from Chad first. Hey, Chad, can you hear us?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to hear what your suggestion is before I.
Okay. Yeah. So based on what I'm hearing from a couple of you is that there's interest in seeing the questions, at least seeing the questions ahead of time.
Yeah.
And at least being able to provide, like you said, and some general feedback on, hey, that question is way off base, or hey, I really think you should add a question about this, in lieu of like a standing subcommittee that's reviewing and editing all of these surveys ahead of time. Providing something more is sending out via email, like you said, giving you guys a couple of days to provide input and feedback, and then sending that back to the consultant. I'm going to go around the room and kind of ask everyone if that's kind of what they're looking for. Paul, is that something that you'd like to see? And we would send it to both, to the entire top plan committee and the entire downtown committee. Give you guys a couple of days to look at it, send us your feedback, and then send that back to the consultant.
Sure, that would be fine, and I think we need to be appropriate. I don't think at any time we're gonna ever have a complete exact survey like everyone will be completely satisfied with 100%.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because, that's just the way things work.
Well, everyone has their own
Everyone does,
opinions, and like they can all agree, we're going to lunch, So I agree. What do you
I
think,
agree.
Ann?
I think that's a great idea. I think it's a good compromise between having the whole committee spend, another month coming up with the survey and just, letting the people we're paying do the survey, but make sure that they do know if we have to look at it and we see any like errors or things they're missing or,
Okay.
and then they'll spend at least, a little bit of time looking at our responses and
Yeah.
should fix it up if they need to, and then we'll be good, and the thing is too, this survey is one thing, I mean, like, I came across a couple of questions yesterday that I just loved. It was what fragments your city and what builds community in your city. I love those questions. So I'm gonna ask them everywhere I go anyway, even if it's not written down. I'll ask, I've got questions for people to tell me what they think, whether it's written down or not.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that, but whatever y'all do is be fun. I think that's a great idea, and I think we would appreciate that.
Okay, what do you think, Victoria?
I'm gonna go back to my old standby. I mean, that sounds great. But I'm hoping that the city staff will again review suggestions and recommendations and edits and make sure that they're free from bias and that they're equitable and they're accessible to all members of the city. Right, so we're looking at bias, equity, and that the questions are accessible. And that's what TEA, the Texas Education Agency, uses when they do item test selection. So that process works with our
Yeah.
K through 12 kiddos here. It should work for our process here.
What are those with?
Equity,
Equity?
accessibility, and free from bias.
Brian? You've been quiet.
Well, I mean, I am on allergy medication. So I've been slowly wading through the books that were donated to the library by DTJ. That were donated by Matt Moore, but they were selected by DTJ
Upon Matt's request.
upon Matt's request. They are one-sided. The last one I finished was arbitrary lines, which is getting rid of zoning in NacTogether or in Houston. The second one I'm going through now is about defunding the police department. And everything, I think this cake's already been baked. It's been baked when we selected DTJ. And it was baked by 3 council members who voted for it. And we can spin around this room all we want to, but we're 8 months into a 15-month process without having done really anything, to be honest, other than chat. So I just don't see, I'm not real dumb, but I don't see what we're doing. I don't understand if we've done anything concrete. All we've done is take positions on things. And we've seen a lot of PowerPoints, but I have no idea. Like when I came from San Antonio the other day and I looked at all the freeways as they came into towns and left towns, and I was thinking 69 corridor, what does this mean? And I still didn't get what does it mean, for the city. And then I hear that the downtown development or comprehensive plan for downtown has selected the city limits of Nacogdoches in 1846, so that it's 1 mile from each part, like downtown is our brick streets. And it selected Star Avenue as the north boundary of downtown. So I will get to Star and say, okay, I'm downtown. How do I get downtown? Well, you got to go 8 more blocks, Brad, to get to the brick streets. I think this is like Alice in Wonderland to me. And it's not your fault, but it's just, I think the cake's baked. I think we are a toothless committee. That's what I think. Sorry. Not sorry.
Kathleen?
I'm supposed to follow that? Okay, first, I think we ought to get Chad, what he thinks, and then you can come back and get me,
Okay.
because I do have some things to say, but we've left Chad out there.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll think my way around.
but he was gonna talk right after you. so
Okay.
you can hear him, and then I'll-
Go ahead, Chad.
So on, we're talking around these issues, and the tenor of our discussion to me feels like exactly what we talked about a month ago. That we're kind of split on what our philosophy for the process of the comprehensive plan is supposed to look like. I think the consultants have their role in this process, but I also believe that these steering committees should have a significant sway on how the process is conducted. And I think we have local experts. Look, our city staff is doing a great job. Have no question about how y'all are doing the liaison work and the background stuff to make sure that this process goes smoothly. But we have content and specific subject matter experts within our city on survey design and those sorts of things, where it shouldn't be just the consultants that make these final decisions on how we collect information. And I think we're trying to find that happy medium of who has what role in this process. And I think more than anything, what I'm hearing, and I've been really passive in this process so I can listen to everyone's viewpoints, what I'm hearing is that our discussion is centered around what the role of the steering committees is in the entire process. And I think that's where it's not just the survey instruments that we're discussing here, it's what the role of those committees are. And, you know, I've never been, Elena, I know you've been a part of comprehensive plans before. This is my first one, and I am the newest person on the block, both on the council and on the comprehensive plan steering committee. But in the end, if the 20 people that are on that committee aren't pushing the consultants to a certain direction, then why do we even have the committee? And that's just my perspective.
Chad, this is Mario, and I want to say something really interesting, because we keep bringing up the expertise and these prior strategic plans, and I'm just, as an outsider looking in, I'm like, I mean, I do hear this often. I hear it in council meetings when I'm watching from home for 5 hours. And I heard it when they were executing this contract in council meeting. Where are these people that we're saying can do this work? Where were they in 2015, 16, 19? I keep hearing we have the expertise. When are they going to come out? Or when were they going to come out? And that's why I think we're now here, because we have 2 committees, but I don't ever think those experts are coming out from this
Some of them
area.
are sitting in the room.
And I agree, and I appreciate your feedback, but I'm serious, I've lived here since 2015, and it's the same line that we have community experts that are coming to save the day. I have not seen them. I'm now 8 years into this journey, and I'm looking for them. Please provide the names, dates, periods of when they've supported an endeavor like this.
So, well, I mean, I volunteered to serve on this process because I believe in it, and I believe in strategic planning, and I believe it's an essential process. Been involved in lots of strategic, been involved in lots of surveys, national surveys. I offered my expertise from the very beginning of this process.
Well, I'd like to say, I volunteered to be on city council and volunteered to serve on this, and I actually have been part of a comprehensive plan before. You don't just walk up and say, hey, let's do a comprehensive plan, and I'm here. And I actually consulted, flown 75,000 miles a year to help people come and come in. So there are people, it's not just me, I mean, I can rattle off
No, but what I'm-
people that has to say. And the comprehensive planning, I don't want to go down there. Okay.
No, but my last thing for Chad is, when we say those things, like, do we have expertise here? I'd like to see who they are. I'd like names, phone numbers, physical addresses of who can be involved to move this forward if we need it.
Pay them $450,000 if they show up.
Okay,
Mine would.
so I think, I think everybody has said a whole lot, and I think it's all really important. But really, my answer here is right here, NacTogether. So if we can't have a committee sit down and I mean, at least we can have feedback about the questions we want to ask and the things that might be considered. So that's a minimal. But I don't agree with you. I've been in places where people wanted to kill each other and they ended up coming to agreement. And we don't have to agree on the technical, question, but we can very readily agree on content and on the kinds of things we want to make sure are asked, and not just through here, but the kind of data that we want our consultants to collect for us. So, I mean, I have some questions that, like what do you most want to keep? What do you most want to change? What do you most want to know? And so all of these things are questions that give a broader perspective to our consultant and to our staff. You don't need to be out there alone. The consultant doesn't need to be out there alone. But if we're not this right here with our steering committee, we're not going to have a good plan. And as much as I love you, I got a little more hopeful, or I wouldn't actually be here.
I'm looking at me.
And anyway, I'm an optimist, so I think we actually can do this instead of talking about process all the time. Let us do it. Let's just do it. We can sit together and do it. So that's my 2 cents. But at least have the questions ahead of time to get feedback on. I had very specific questions that we just didn't even get to at the last meeting because it was only 45 minutes, and actually some wording that I think is more equitable, more. And a couple of questions. I think there were a couple that were not, as you described them, that I would have liked to just give a little feedback. Nobody has to do everything my way or anybody else's way, but consensus is not, okay, at the end, we have to agree at the end of this meeting. And I would suggest that at the end of this meeting, we decide what it is we've agreed upon. And we write that down. And that is what our consensus is. So we will have to come to an agreement in this room. I think we can do that, about what we want to do. And I've already heard, at least we want to get the questions ahead of time and be able to give individual feedback. I would prefer for anybody who wants to, not for people who don't need to, come together and say, okay, I heard I didn't get to see your idea and I didn't get to see yours, but what if we did it this way? Because that's where creativity lies. So that's my preference, is to have both and then have a small meeting, whoever can come, and then reach consensus that we deliver to them. So, and again, I like this. I don't want to get back together because but I think we should be together. So.
Did you have something else?
He keeps trying to.
I do.
Oh, sorry.
I'm trying not to jump in and interrupt anyone speaking. I know there's a small amount of latency. Mario, I think what you said is interesting because your perspective is completely different from mine. You've been here for 8 years, and your perspective on Nacogdoches is vastly different than mine. I don't know the reason why our subject matter experts don't get involved. I think we could all posit some kind of theory as to why they don't participate. Maybe that's part of what we're supposed to do, is figure out how we engage the people that really care about Nacogdoches and how we get them involved in this process. Maybe it's not that they haven't wanted to be a part of the process. Maybe they've been disenfranchised by previous processes that even I don't remember happening. I don't know the answer, but I think your perspective is good because it gives me an idea of, well, maybe I'm not thinking about this clearly enough. Obviously my perspective is not fully developed, and hearing that from you, maybe there's another reason for why they aren't jumping at the gun to work on these plans. Or maybe like Dr. King said, maybe they are already volunteering and Councilmember Bellinger. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe they are actually our steering committees, and maybe we're just not utilizing them to their greatest extent.
One thing real quick, I'll be quick, that I was going to respond to like what Kathleen was saying. So the thing that everyone coming together to write the survey as a group and reaching consensus, I think that's too cumbersome. I think there's people like, and actually I think even if a volunteer in our community wanted to help write the plan or help with their expertise because they were good at survey questions, I think that that's not actually fair because that person is representing what they see and other people in other parts of town have other things that contributed. So I like that we have a steering committee made of a variety of people. I think we all give our input of what we think about survey questions. And then I think we let somebody outside the city with experience turn that into a survey that we use without us all agreeing on it. Because I think a lot of times in committees like that, the person who's the most persistent or who's the loudest gets their way and other people don't, who may really have more to contribute. So I think doing everything as a consensus, I think at the very end, when we write the plan, we'll need to really have lots of those kind of consensus meetings. But I think for this survey, it's fine for us all to give our input on questions and then see put the survey out there and see what we get. I don't think we all need to agree on all the questions. I think it's good for them to know what we think is important and that will inform, but we won't, as Paul said, we're not going to get all the answers that we would like out of these surveys. They'll give us some information, some will be missing because the way the questions are, and we'll just have to try to get that information other ways.
Well, let me clarify. I'm not talking about agreeing on every question. I'm just talking about content. But I'll tell you what, I'll take it back. I'm happy to.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah.
But I wish you would share, if people want their ideas shared with everybody,
yeah.
then maybe you could do that. Some people may not want their ideas shared, but
Oh,
that would
yeah.
help me to hear your ideas,
Sure.
and then that
Okay.
might spring something.
So Elena's suggestion, I'm going to amend your suggestion that you will send us all a copy of the survey.
Mhm.
We'll all send you back all our suggestions, things like, don't like, and with the note as to shareable or not shareable. And then you'll share all of them with all the shareable people too. Just so that we'll know that. And then give it all to DTJ and we're gonna, and they'll fix up the survey if they think they need to, and we'll use that survey.
What do you think, Kurt?
That all sounds great to me. As I hear this summarization of what's going on, I'm looking at this kind of timeline form here. And I do have a question. Out there where the star says this is where we are and we're launching Meeting in a Box. The next item in the process is initial focus groups, up to 16 total, some virtual and some in person. And I'm just wondering, do we know who those focus groups are at this point?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I feel like we got a little off track. And
You skip Larry, though.
so, I'm sorry, Larry. I apologize. That was not my intent, Larry.
I want Kirk to finish his.
No, I'm just curious about that. And what I was gonna say is do we know who those are? And it says up to 16 total, which I wonder why, is there a reason that it's only 16 or,
You're number 7.
and I'm just curious if, for example, say we did, well, I don't want to see us find ourselves in a situation where after that process is closed and finished, somebody in the community says, well, why weren't these people interviewed, or why, so I in an effort to make sure that we're all inclusive and equitable, I'm just wondering how we're going to be sure that we haven't overlooked some particular group. So all I was saying is, well, anyhow, I think you see where I'm going. So
I think I can answer a lot of questions once I go through this kind of the tactics and then the summary. I think that'll help address a lot of the things that we're hearing after we hear from Larry.
I think the question was originally, should we look at the survey questions before there's them? Yes, I think we need to look at how the feedback is collected from the look at those questions. I'm a little hesitant to say that, just I email you what I think about them, and somebody else emails you what they think about them. And then none of us ever look at, what the overall picture is. I think it would be a good idea for the steering committee and the downtown committee to then look at all that feedback and say, oh yeah, this is really good, or this, where did this question come from? Because there's a lot of creativity that goes on. Yes, it takes a long time for groups to do work. But one of the things I teach is group work. And you get better decisions out of groups than you do individuals. That we know. We've studied it for many, many years, since the 1900s they've been studying. And we know we get better decisions out of groups than we do individuals. So I would like to see at some point the steering committee and the downtown committee and whatever other committees there are, have some discussion about those questions too before they go back to the consultants and go out to everybody. Now, yeah, does that extend the time? Yes, it does. Does it take more time? Yes, it does. But in order to allay some of the fears maybe that Brad is expressing, it may take time. And there may need to be more input. Because whether you agree with Brad's fears or not, folks, those fears are present in this community and have been from the beginning of this process. And if we blindly go on and play like they don't exist and ignore them, then we will reap the results of that in the end. And I think I genuinely come into this process, I don't want the strategic plan to be put on the shelf and not used. That is the last thing I want. And believe me, every strategic planning process I go into, that is the last thing. But unfortunately, 90% of the time, strategic plans are put on the shelf and never ever used. That's just the facts. So I want this to be changing for the community. I want it to be good for the community. I want it to be productive for the community. And that means we're going to have to hear from everybody, whether people we want to hear from or not, or like what they have to say. We still have to hear from them. But yes, there needs to be some, and it will prevent from what happened with this from happening. So that when the survey's done and the survey's already done, we get the results back and we look at the questions and go, why did they ask that?
Why
Or
didn't?
why didn't they ask this question? Or what benefit is this question to us? And that keeps us from having the process of the situation from consultants have all the knowledge and they're coming here and giving us this knowledge because they have very low knowledge about this, honestly. Just my
Okay.
thoughts.
Let's go over material. All right. So the first document that we're going to look at is, I think, the tactics. So this is, all right, so this document is essentially a list of engagement tactics that were presented to council at the beginning of the process and provides some supplemental material as to the different strategies that are going to be engaged as we engage the public. So this first one is just a quote from Jane Jacobs, how essentially, she's kind of she's a famous planning advocate from the 1960s. And so she's referenced in a lot of planning topics and really is sort of someone who kind of paved the way for public engagement. But this is what says cities have the capability of providing something for everyone, only because and only when they're created by everybody. So that's just a philosophy. So this first line.
I just want you to know, I use some for work in my classes.
Okay, yeah, she's great.
So just thought I'd tell you.
Yeah. So this first slide talks about the persona-based engagement. It's designed to reach everyone. Essentially, staffing committees you guys have filled out that persona mural that identifies the contacts and organizations that we can tap into to look into, that we can tap into as we look to reach those hard-to-reach groups. Yes.
Is that closed or is that?
No, it is a
It's
breathing, living document.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and so.
Elena,
Yeah.
Could you share your screen, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to share it again.
Thank you.
I stopped sharing it and. There we go. All right. All right, can you see it?
I can, thank you.
All right, so as part of this process, the DC will monitor who they have and haven't heard from and turn back to that document for opportunities to reach those groups. So as part of the survey, they'll be collecting demographic information. And so that way they can actually track the types of groups that they're hearing from. And so that way, if they find that there's a group that's missing, they can go back and refer to that document to who can help them connected to those groups. The second one is project branding, which we've already completed. You're going to just create greater awareness, participation, and buy-in by creating just a unified theme and messaging. The project website, which is live in English and Spanish, is responsive to desktop, mobile, and tablet. So this will be kind of the hub for everything related to the project, including surveys, upcoming events, things of that nature. Virtual engagement rooms. And so this is meant to supplement the in-person public community meetings that we're going to have. This provides outreach to the community and promotion of surveys and meetings. So essentially, if you weren't able to participate in an in-person meeting, this would be a similar format of essentially a virtual open forum where it would be set up similar to a physical room where you're going through and you're looking at different topics, different questions, things of that nature. So the idea is it's a duplicate to the in-person, just another online tool for people who can't readily attend those types of events. Next one is surveys. So there's going to be 5 surveys about 5 topics, including community vision survey, transportation and infrastructure, business and economics, downtown arts and culture, and housing. And then based on those surveys, we'll have follow-up questions on the website as needed. So for example, if we have a survey and we find that there's one particular question that's kind of all over the board and we need to do a deeper dive into that particular question or that particular topic, we can take that feedback to create a more detailed survey or perhaps have another focus group or create another strategy to gather more information on that particular topic or what have you. The next one is, plan feedback surveys. So there's going to be a survey to collect public comment on the community vision. So we're going to have the first survey that's going to be a community visioning survey, and that will also be accompanied by a 2-day comprehensive plan visioning event. So a 2-day event where the public will be invited out. We're going to have focus group meetings, in-person interviews, and then based on that input that we collect, there will be a draft community vision that's drafted, and then we'll do another survey of input on that. So essentially to say, hey, this is what we heard. Is that on board? Are we way off track? So really kind of closing that feedback loop and sharing the feedback to make sure that it's actually reflective of what they heard in the first place. And that also be presented to the committees. So all of the survey data that's collected will be presented to both committees in a way that you can understand. So there will be graphs, there'll be charts that show the different responses and percentages of those. So anything that they collect will be presented to the committees. So you guys can have an idea of kind of input that we're receiving, the types of responses that we're getting, and we'll have a conversation about that. So you guys will be deeply involved in the review and kind of processing of that data and what it means, and how that can inform the different elements of the comprehensive plan.
That'll
So,
likely be an interesting meeting.
yes.
Will the surveys kind of indicate like who filled out the survey, so we can kind of look at and see there's a, people from of this age group or of this, community or things like that.
So each survey at the end includes demographic information, including age, including whether you live in the city or outside the city, whether you work in the city or outside the city, if you're a student, if you have kids, if you have young kids, if you have adult kids, if you're associated with SFA, it'll have lots of demographic
So
information
you can
to kind of profile the
Give us
responsive. So we can see like, okay, well, here's the answers and here's who the answers are coming from. It's representative of this group. So it'll be informative in that way. And then if there's a group missing, we can see that.
You can see
It'll,
that. Yeah,
it'll,
that's fine.
it'll include English or Spanish speaking, information on ethnicity background. And so it's meant to really capture the profile of the responses. So we can make sure we're not just hearing from one group.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. That's
Yeah.
what I want to make sure of, yeah.
And then there'll be a survey to collect public comment on the draft plan. So anytime there's a draft that comes out, there's going to be a survey because it's gonna be pushed to the public. So the draft will be pushed out to the public, and then you guys will provide comments on that, right? Because you're gonna be reviewing these as they come out, but the general public will also have an opportunity to provide comments on the draft of the plan.
Yeah.
And then that feedback will be communicated back to this group, right? So you'll have your own kind of internal discussion, we'll get general feedback on it, and then we'll present that general feedback back to the committee. So it'll be it won't just be you guys providing your personal input, it'll be a combination of you guys, general public input, and then we'll discuss that amongst the group to see if, the direction is way off base as far as what the community wants.
Yeah.
And so I think that'll be, that'll really help speak to the process too. So that's that one. Social media. So the consultant's gonna help us provide graphics, and direct staff to outreach online community groups and promotion, surveys and events. So essentially, this document that you see, we'll use this, and DTJ will help us provide additional content for messaging to push out to the community for newspaper, NCRE, going on the radio, online engagement platforms. And so we'll be pushing out content. So that way you search for NacTogether, you're going to find information, and it'll all be on the website as well. So that's another strategy. Email newsletter. So outreach to community, promotion of survey and meetings. So, we've got that website where you can sign up for future notifications. We'll also just be pushing out general email information, general email information. I think, what's that group that we have? Can't remember. There's
We have an email, is that circle?
there's like a master email list of people who just want general city notifications. And so that'll be used. And then you guys will be able to push that out to your social networks. And so basically being proactive, instead of people working for us, we'll just try to push as much as we can. And focus groups and interviews. So right now there are 16 focus groups, both virtual and in person, on various topics such as business, environment. And they'll be targeted to audiences such as seniors, youth, merchants, Hispanic community. 10 interviews by the consultant team, 5 interviews by staff. And this is just kind of the baseline. If we find that we need more focus groups, staff can go and conduct more focus group meetings. If we find we need more interviews, we'll go out and we'll do more interviews. This is just kind of the baseline based on the scope of services that was included in the contract that council approved.
Do we have a list of content there, like it says various topics such as, but
Yeah.
is there a living document or list at this present time that
Yes.
we could review and
Yes,
maybe
so
make
that was, that persona's mural you guys filled out had different categories.
those categories at the top are those,
Neighborhoods,
Sticky notes.
education, economic development,
okay.
those are all different categories of focus group topics topics of focus groups that we're gonna have.
So if for some reason there happened to be a topic that, like you say, it's a living, breathing
Mhm.
document, so that another column could be expanded
Yes.
and added.
I think there'll be subcategories too, as things, as we have the discussions, things will come up. And we'll say, okay, well, we need to have.
Need to break that down, yeah, okay,
Mhm.
good, okay.
Yeah,
I think that's an excellent question, but I think we had 2 other columns. We had history and neighborhoods.
yeah, so that's included.
Okay.
And we are,
And there was some overlap.
Yeah,
so you have them inside of one of those?
so this is just,
Because you had your 5.
so this says business, environment, et cetera. So this is a whole complete list.
One other question on that, the murals, is it, how available is it to the general public, or is it, or I'm just curious
Yeah.
if that's maybe a mistake to
Yeah.
open that up, or is it limited just to the committee at this point in time, or what's the thinking that goes into that? 'Cause I'm just trying to understand how that can be better utilized to be informative.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, just curious.
So to answer your question, it was limited to the committees as well as council, planning and zoning commission, some of our other city council or city boards, city staff, and because the idea is you guys are representative of that group, and then you have contacts in your network, and then those contacts can help us open up doors to those other groups. If we open it up to general public, I think it could
Might
get to the
go
point where
crazy.
it's not manageable.
Yeah, right.
It's not
Okay.
manageable. And
Okay.
so the idea is you guys provide those key contacts, and then those contacts maybe can provide more contacts. And
Right.
so we build off of that. So that's kind of that baseline. And
One
then,
thing I noticed about it was, some names that I put on it disappeared.
Hmm.
I went back and put them back on it.
Okay.
And I wondered at some point if maybe too many people had access to it,
Oh,
that there were people editing it without the knowledge of
okay.
anyone.
Well, I know at one point when we had just everything on there, it was exported. So if someone's gone through and changed things since then, we have the master list of everyone. And so there is a separate document that's got anything and everything. So if something was taken off, that we have it all.
And you mentioned that in June, in our June meeting at the rec center, that was gonna happen.
Yes.
You know, we're gonna freeze it and then renew it
But you
for
you
additional.
can still go in and add things too, but we captured all that in time and we have that.
Is that who's on the focus groups? Is that the 16 members? Are they gonna be chosen from that or?
Yes, so those people that you identified in those groups, we'll reach out to them and either invite them, or if they have a better contact or a different contact, they help us make those connections.
And
So
those will
those,
be selected randomly or?
No, it's those based on the list that you guys provided. Yeah, so some of the people had like 50 contacts. That's too big of a, that's too big of a list. And some of the lists, there were duplicate names in different categories.
There were a lot of-
So
I did that.
there's a lot of, a lot of duplicates, a lot of crossover, because a lot of people are involved in a lot of different things. And so what we did is we tried to consolidate. So if someone was in like 5 different categories, which category do they fit in best? And so that kind of eliminated a lot of the duplicates and redundancies. So everyone's accounted for, but we may have shifted them to a group that they are more representative of, or maybe they have more input on. Does that make sense? Because I think people weren't looking at other people's contacts. Everyone was just kind of doing their own thing, and they didn't realize, oh, so-and-so put them over here too. And so
But
that's.
surely they're not going to do a focus group interview with all the people, for example, that were listed in the neighborhoods.
No, so there's focus groups,
Right.
and then there's interviews, one-on-one interviews, and those are two separate things. We'll talk more about that. Yes, Kathleen?
Okay, sorry. I'm back to, I know we had 7 columns, right? Because
More than that.
I know we added neighborhoods and I know, I mean,
A lot of columns.
I know we added neighborhoods and I know we added history. So those 2.
Yeah.
And then, but we still only have the 5 survey topics. So we started out with the 5 survey topics. And then we added 2 more columns. So I'm still confused because we put people into those columns. Were there,
So those columns are for
Seven or
focus
eight.
groups. The columns, the mural, the columns, those were categories for focus groups,
okay,
not surveys.
And
Um,
that was my question earlier. So in the column with all the people that are listed.
Mhm.
Let's take neighborhoods, for example.
Yeah.
Because I think there were a lot of people listed, maybe not. But how do you decide who goes into, how will they decide who goes into a focus group? Are they gonna do multiple focus groups in the neighborhood category?
So we actually have we're gonna have a focus group coming up on neighborhoods. So in that particular category, it wasn't a very long list. And so we're actually gonna be looking to add more to that list, because really for like a focus group, you want anywhere from like 10 to 20, knowing that not everyone that
That's a
you
huge focus
knew,
group.
or like, well, I think it's in here, you'll actually see like 8 to 16, knowing that not everyone you invite is going to attend. So the idea is that it's okay if you have like a little bit more representation than you need, but in that particular list, I think we're kind of short. So some categories had a lot of different contacts,
Mhm.
some had a few, and then we try to reduce redundancies. And
Are they gonna do multiple focus groups in a category if they have lots and lots of people? Are they just gonna do one big huge focus group, which is not really a focus group?
so I think initially, I do want to try to get through the rest of the document, but there will be a focus group for each category, and based on that feedback, maybe additional more in-depth focus groups. And so you may find that during the discussion, you need to have another meeting to talk about a specific topic within that focus group. So this process really is meant to be not something that's written in stone. It's meant to evolve. So the focus groups will help inform each public engagement activity will help inform all the other public engagement activities. So if we find that during a focus group, there's a lot of issues that weren't able to be covered during that meeting, we can have additional ones. And so some other focus groups may be really short and we may get everything that we need. So it kind of depends. I don't want to speak out of turn or tell you the wrong thing. I think generally there's a set of focus groups that are planned for specific topics. And then depending on that feedback and we may have additional, more in-depth focus groups based on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
To answer your question more directly is that Elaine and I don't know that answer.
Yeah.
And if it'd be
Thank
okay, let Elaine call DTJ.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
And when
We're
you're
gonna kind
talking,
of dance around the question.
and that's fine.
I
If
don't
you
think
don't know
she-
something, just tell me. I don't know for sure. And again, as I said before, I'm kind of into process.
Mhm.
And so process to me is important.
So I think this is the minimum baseline
Yeah.
and then it can grow.
And
This is the
if you
takeaway.
would also ask them how they're going to choose those focus group members.
Mhm.
I doubt very seriously they're gonna have 20 people on focus group because it's unwilling. You can't do a focus group with 20 people on it. The standard is 6 to 8 people. And you really focus more on 6, trying to get 6. So, how are they gonna choose out of a category if there were 50 people listed in there?
Mhm.
How are they gonna choose 6 to 8 people out of a category that has 50 people listed in it? It's gonna be random samples, it's gonna be purposeless sample. How are they gonna do it?
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna have that issue. I can't think of a category offhand that had that many people in it.
At one time, when I looked at
and-
that, there was a huge number of names in some of those
Well,
categories.
let's just get to
Let's-
the answer.
yes.
To her because we
Thank
don't.
you. Okay.
And
I don't know the answer.
I'm trying to find that link and I just
Okay.
haven't found it yet.
So, okay, next is on-the-street engagement. So this is where the whole team will actually be kind of piggybacking off of other public activities that are taking place in town, meeting people where they are, downtown events, SFA campus, other civic events that are taking place in town. 2-day engagement events. So August 25th and 26th, that's that 2-day comprehensive plan visioning event. And those activities will include interviews, focus group meetings, and a visioning session where people from the interviews and focus groups will be invited back to have a follow-up meeting to talk about everything that they heard during that first day. And then there's going to be a general public meeting where everyone from the community will be invited and will give broad overviews of the process. There will be different topics and questions for people to write comment on. And that'll really just be kind of like an open house style where, the format isn't set in stone now, but what I've seen in the past is you may have stations. You may have like an initial big introduction and introduction to the staff, and here's what we're gonna do, and here's what the process is gonna look like, and then there may be stations for you to go and get more information in detail, but that format hasn't been finalized yet. But it is a general public meeting. I imagine we're gonna have it in a place where we can fit a lot of people,
Right. And
so so that's not finalized yet, but I just wanted you to know that that's kind of this intent of it.
because it's coming up soon, so I'd like to start advertising that, obviously, because that
Yeah.
was done for a lot of communities.
So I'm actually sending out an email today to the comp plan committee and downtown committee to remind them of some upcoming events, and then we'll be pushing that out to local media, getting it in the paper,
Yeah.
radio, all that.
They still
So-
share with all.
And then the downtown event is gonna be somewhere in September 20th, 21st. That's gonna be that downtown design charrette, where they're gonna do a walking tour, look at different design ideas. And that is a really intensive, fast-paced process, different than the comp plan because it is a smaller area. It's much more detailed and it's a more specific group. And then again, there's still a general public meeting where the entire public is invited to attend and participate. And that will also be duplicated by an online virtual room like we looked at a while ago, where if you can't come to that meeting, you can do the virtual one.
Now, will we have seen those designs that they're gonna present?
Yes, so the downtown committee, all that stuff will be presented to them ahead of time. And the downtown committee will be invited. So they'll be the ones really steering that process.
How much advance notice do we have on that?
I'll just talk to Jessica. She's managing that. organizing it together, but I haven't really been as involved in the downtown pieces as she has. So I don't want to speak on her behalf. But I think, I don't know either.
So the downtown and Mario attended, both, just one, just the first one.
Both.
These are both.
Mhm.
They just met last week and the week before. So they've just met and kind of the, something you said earlier about, downtown has been defined, they haven't defined. They have
Yeah.
said, here are ideas. And so everybody in those groups have said, hey, I think this should be here. I think this should be here. We need an XY there. We need an ABC there. So they've just thrown ideas on a piece of paper and just has collected all of that data.
Wow, because I've heard from two different members that it's a done deal.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
They just got together and it was two different groups and they got together and they looked at a map and they put sticky notes with their ideas
And they
on a
brainstormed.
map. And they
And so
brainstormed.
one of the things from the downtown committee members would like to have on there was on the map that they were looking at, because they're in council chambers and the different versions of maps, showed that factory
Mhm.
as a visual so that they could understand where it was in relation to buildings today.
Right.
So it is aligned on the map, but it does not mean it's a recommendation from that group to be aligned on the map.
Okay.
And it was highlighters and sticky notes.
Yeah, so
That's all.
So it's very rudimentary.
So that information has been collected as of last week and sent to them. That's where I am in that process. So I don't know to answer when we will see things because they just got it.
If it's something that usually requires a lot of thought and it's long and requires a lot of review, Jessica will usually put it to that group within a couple of weeks before to give them a few weeks to look at it. I know, like with the downtown summary, she gave them 2 weeks to review that and then came to the meeting, the monthly meeting, and they got to give their feedback. If it's something that doesn't require a lot, it's not super long, it doesn't require a lot of review, usually about a week and a half before, so.
So when will we do this kind of visioning and getting the feedback, thinking about all these things in the larger?
so the big community-wide 2-day visiting event is August 25th and 26th.
So with even
And then
our
the-
committees, like the downtown is thinking through and being creative.
Yeah, so the downtown committee is a little bit different because the nature of that plan is different than the comprehensive plan because it's a small area plan. So they get into the nitty-gritty on sidewalk widths and architecture design and outdoor, so they're really getting to the specifics because that plan will be much more detailed than the comp plan. The comp plan is more of a high level visionary plan, and we will get into the weeds with transportation and what we want to see as far as housing and environmental protections and things like that. But I don't think you're going to see the level of detail that the downtown plan is doing because they're actually getting into design and things that'll be included. Is that good?
Yeah, but I'm hoping we'll have creative discussions about,
Yes.
okay, so.
Yes, ma'am.
So only after August 25th, you think?
No, no, let me, let's
Okay.
get through this and then we'll.
Sure.
Cause it's, so, and then meeting in a box. We already know all about that.
Yeah.
So the next one I wanna look at is that overview. Chad, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Still there? Okay, make sure you didn't. We didn't lose you. All right, so this document is, so we're at in the process. It lists all the touch points, including meetings, interviews, surveys, and also just provides some general information on kind of the order. So if you look, that says phase 2, initial engagement, launch meeting in a box right under that. That's this image here with 3 people in a circle. So these are the initial focus groups up to 16. Initially, some virtual, some in person. These have shifted. I think initially these were planned for June and then we pushed those to August to try to wait till we have more of the SFA faculty and students in town. Below that, you see initial interviews. So 10 by the consultant. These are one-on-one interviews, 5 by staff. Depending on the interviews, we may have more. Under that, you have a series of 5 online surveys. Those are the ones that we looked at just a while ago. The post topics include community vision. Those are kind of those broad questions that we talked about before: transportation and infrastructure, business and economics, downtown arts and culture, and then housing. And then based on the feedback, you may have additional more detailed surveys that dive deeper into specific topics. 2 multi-day engagement events. Those are the ones we just talked about with the comprehensive plan and downtown plan. 1 public meeting is included as part of each of the 2-day engagement events. So, those engagement events include focus group interviews, but also just general community-wide public meetings. And then coupled with a virtual engagement room. So if you can't come to the in-person meeting, you can participate online. And then below that, 2 public meetings for both the comp plan and downtown plan to share findings, solicit input, and confirm what the consultant team has heard. So basically, they'll be coming back and having additional community meetings as we go along to make sure that the data that they've heard is representative of the community. So we'll have kind of draft visionary goals, objectives based on that survey information, present that to the committees, and then push that back out to the community and get their feedback on that. Say, hey, is this what you told us? And then so there'll be that kind of closed feedback loop. And then phase 3, equitable engagement. So this is essentially ensuring that we get feedback from all the groups and provide a way for people to engage that maybe wouldn't normally engage in our traditional town hall meeting. So it talks about working through that persona sheet and tapping into local organizations. If we find through that demographic profile, because each survey will have demographics, so we kind of see who we're hearing from, we'll be able to kind of evaluate and monitor along the way, and then go back to that contact list you guys filled out to plug back into those communities. Additional man on the street engagement events, like we talked about earlier, kind of meeting people where they are, picking back off of other planned events, online surveys to collect public input on the community vision. That's where I just talked about.
Elena,
Huh?
you scored your score.
Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh, Chad. So sorry. Yeah, so online survey to collect public comment on the community vision. So once that community vision has been drafted, reviewed by the committees, we'll push that back out to the public again and get general feedback. And then we'll have youth activities and childcare at our public events.
Thank you for the childcare. That makes a big difference.
Yeah. You would be amazed at what crackers and crayons can do for a bunch of primary age kids. So that way the parents can provide meaningful input and they're not worried about hurting kittens, so to speak. So we'll have people help, and we'll have kind of fun activities, colorings, things like that. So people with kids can come and feel like they're part of the process as well. And then phase 4, draft feedback. So online survey to collect public comment on the draft plan. So as the consultant is providing drafts of these to the committees and you're providing input, those drafts will be pushed out to the community as well, and they can provide general input. And then we'll take that and again, present it back to you. So close that feedback loop. And then a final wrap up public meeting once all of the drafts have been reviewed and revised, and just presenting it in its complete form. And so there will be public input and surveys along the way as we're going through the process, so that way at the end, we make sure we're not way off base and people are involved as the process goes forward. So that's kind of a overview of the engagement tactics, the process. I think that this is going to be really helpful in helping people understand more about what's coming, kind of setting some expectations about what they can expect, the different topics that they're going to be covered and how. And we're committed to really be more proactive on pushing out that information and publicizing it. And so that way we don't have so many questions as to what we're going to talk about, when we're going to talk about it. So I think this is going to be really helpful.
And I think it would be helpful to remember that we are the people. We are the people that are engaging, and we are the people that are getting the feedback and reviewing the feedback from our people that we know. And this is driven by us, you can tell. It's very objective and it's a lot of work. And I appreciate you driving that process.
And so the content is going to be public driven. DGJ and the consultant, they're helping us facilitate that process by giving us tools and a structure and format, but the content is not going to come from DTJ, it's going to come from the public. And then they'll put that in a format that's easy to understand and review and present it back to you. But the content is very much going to be driven by community input. All right. So I know we wanted to kind of circle back. I did want to ask a couple of questions of the committee members. So I know we heard a lot of different opinions and viewpoints. I think we do have some differences in opinion amongst the group of the actual role of the committees, about the desire or level of involvement in reviewing the process as far as the public engagement questions and so on and so forth, and various desires for level of involvement in the writing, editing of questions. I think we found some recommendations or suggestions that were kind of in the middle as far as sending you guys the proposed survey questions, getting your feedback, taking your feedback, consolidating it, and then pushing it back out to the group so you guys can see the different feedback from your colleagues.
You don't
And
even
then
have to
forwarding that
consolidate,
on
you can
to
just send
the-
it to us fresh like we sent it to you if you want to, right, Kathleen?
Yeah, and I think,
And then we can have it.
back to Larry's point, I mean, the idea of getting together and being creative. I'm not talking about bullying or trying to get something through, but being creative, I think that needs to be offered. And then those who can come, and those who can't, and it still goes up to DTJ or whatever. But I think that creative thing would be a good,
It's- yeah.
offer that committee.
I do better coming up with ideas when I'm talking to other people.
Yeah,
about
me
it.
too.
Yeah.
And every time
Yeah.
you say something, I go, oh, look, and then it really, there is a huge creative aspect in this, so I think,
Yeah.
is that the consensus then? We'll give it to you, we'll share, and then have a meeting, I think,
Yeah.
just.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that you guys give us, we forward to the group. I do want to err on the side of caution about creating more work for the committees,
Right.
for staff. Because I think that,
I wouldn't have volunteered for this if I didn't intend to work.
well, and I
I'll be
think,
honest with you.
I think we need to get consensus on the subcommittee about the direction moving forward as far as that. So Mario.
I'm also concerned about confidentiality. Once you email that group, it can be forwarded and used in however way you want. So keeping it small, keeping it a tight time limit to review and give feedback.
And then come together, I think that's a great idea,
So,
all good,
so when you say
consensus.
come together, I want to make sure I understand exactly what it is that you're proposing, and then we can pose it to the group. So do you mind just being very explicit as to what it
That
is
we
that you're
have
looking for?
one gathering and we look at the feedback that's come through. And we see, and we just have a meeting to review it and maybe see what we think about it. And I don't know till I've seen all that feedback, but and we might find in that creative process, we have like two or three good questions that we're suggesting or recommending. So it's not all just individual. So, all these statements don't help as much as having us really think through
An
and be
idea.
creative.
I have a time-saving idea. So when you send us all the survey questions, why don't we, after we get, rather than write them ourselves and send them back and why don't you and I at least get together and look at the survey questions together?
Yeah, or anybody
And
else
who
who
wants to, why don't we,
Yeah.
you send us survey questions and anybody who wants to can just look at them on their own
Yeah.
and offer suggestions. Or if some people want to meet as a group, we can meet as a group and offer suggestions. That was just a one-time thing.
Right, and just bring them all together and say,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, instead of
So,
having feedback. I like that.
Yeah, so you send us survey questions and we can just, it doesn't have to be a meeting that everybody can come to. We'll just, because a lot of people are working. Some of us are retired and don't have to go to work every day. So those of us that have to go to work might prefer to spend a few hours over coffee, talking about the questions and come up with stuff and have a great time. Well, Mario may just want to have a look at them and write down his ideas and send them off and get going. That's actually where my
That's a
work today,
two-step thing, yeah.
but that way, I don't know, that's my suggestion at the same time.
I do say that, it was important to council that this process be as transparent as possible, that there's no behind closed doors meetings,
Okay,
everything's recorded, open to the public.
okay,
So I am very hesitant to
Gotcha.
promote kind of private
Well,
conversations
then
and the
have it public.
recommendations.
We can
Does
just.
that make
say, right?
sense?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Isn't that what the
And-
meetings in the box do?
And so it's,
Right.
well, but that's your response to something different than what's being proposed
right,
here.
yeah.
And
Are the meetings with the staff and the consultants being recorded?
Now, that is a question. I would really like to see the meetings
Yeah.
between the staff and the consultants. And I think that
Are they
does need
public?
to be
It's
recorded.
part of transparency.
Well,
I mean, there's a whole lot of
Yeah.
non-transparent things going on in this whole process.
We
well,
really.
all of the work that we're doing behind the scenes to manage the process, if we sat down and recorded every phone call, everything that we did, we would never get anything done. That's just not
Well, what
realistic.
about, do you have
Um,
online?
But
Well, there's a lot of non-realistic things, but if we're gonna be transparent, we're gonna be
so
transparent.
what I wanted to get back to is that it's also important for the project managers to be involved in that process. We can clearly communicate all of that back to the group. So I think that's a great idea. It's not as simple,
Yeah,
you
right.
know,
It's just
and
doing it, yeah.
so, Bryce, yeah.
Let me kind of
Okay, you can.
capture this in a box.
Okay.
Is it
Not a meeting in a box.
Oh, my goodness.
Brian, my first one.
Um, We have to, and Mario said it, you know, y'all are the people, and y'all are only a part of the people that are on these task force, right? So if there was 100% agreement in this room, it may be 10% of the totality of the two groups, right? I don't suspect that be the case. I mean, because you're all kind of from different areas, and so you're speaking from different points of view, which represents a large group. My point is, if you all get the questions in advance, no issues there whatsoever. I'm not, these aren't the actual times. You get the questions 2 days before, you get 2 days to review them, then the group as a whole comes together and reviews them. If people can't come, they can't come, that's fine, but it needs to be a larger meeting and not
That's good.
these two and these four and these three, because otherwise there's no way for us to capture the feedback. Because otherwise then we get into, it's just this group and it is not the whole that is.
Well, in reality, I don't think the steering committee has ever had 100% attendance, has it?
All right.
There are a few of us that have not missed any meeting.
The downtown group for a whole, because I've only attended a couple of them, the downtown as a whole has had good attendance, never perfect, but it's been pretty good. So did that kind of summarize, because I know these are great ideas, and I think that if two people want to sit down and have coffee and talk about it in advance, knock yourself out.
There's
I mean, it's a
nothing you
good
can do
idea.
to stop that. I mean,
No,
people are gonna
and I don't
talk,
want to stop
text.
that. I'm saying that's a good, I'm saying that's a good idea.
Maybe instead of
then-
even organizing. a meeting,
Feedback and then give them.
Right, and so if,
Perfect.
just using
I'm
you
good
as an
with that.
example, if the two of you wanted to sit down on the front porch and have a glass of coffee and talk about it for an hour,
Right,
fantastic,
right.
you should do it anyway. But
Right.
then those ideas have to come back to the whole.
Right.
And that was the only point I was trying to make, was let's not get so sidetracked that the whole is disregarded for,
And it shouldn't be.
So,
so we're good there.
Yes, I think
Okay.
so, but I think that, I think there's still not consensus on having just a regular standing subcommittee meeting to review all of the,
Well, and that's what I'm saying is that's what I'm saying is we can't.
yeah.
There can't be a standing subcommittee because these groups were appointed as a whole, so we invite the whole. If everybody in this room is all who shows up, that's great.
No, that's what he said. He said that would be the whole steering committee or the whole downtown committee.
Right, and so like this
Shockingly,
group
they
is
might
an
be able to meet
unofficial.
together.
This is an unofficial group, and that's what I was saying was, it's
Yeah.
not the bodies in this room that are doing this. When you get the downtown questions, that goes to the downtown steering committee.
Mhm.
Right, and not
it's just the same question.
just these two.
Right.
Right, I'm just,
So
I thought maybe there weren't.
are you going to send a copy of the survey questions to everybody in both committees? Or just us?
So the idea was that, because this is really a community-wide visioning,
Right.
that it's gonna go to both committees for your
Okay.
review. And my initial thought was you guys would provide feedback in a couple of days and then forward that to the,
So and here's a suggestion, when you send us the surveys, you can say, please send your feedback on these things, and if you'd like to talk it over with other people, friends and family, neighbors, other community members, feel free to have any discussions you want, but get your replies, your suggestions and your complaints about it.
we just give
Send
it,
that by such time. That way, if all of us do want to get together, that would be a meeting, it would be just us getting together to talk about it. Would that be, and that would not necessarily go against city council's desire of transparency?
no, it's because I think that is,
You know what I mean?
that was intended to happen,
Yeah,
was
Yeah.
that it's not your thoughts.
right.
It's your sphere of influence and your friends and your
Right,
family
right,
members who you're consolidating their thoughts and you're bringing those back to the.
Yeah, yeah.
Good point.
Here's a slippery slope though, because those questions are not published
Yeah.
to the public. Again, having them shareable with other public members before they're finalized and shared may create confusion. And I know that from working with the Texas Education Agency, you wouldn't send anything out in mass that could be shared with the public. You want to keep some confidentiality within the groups and not share it with neighbors and public and people at the grocery store, because then that could change and create confusion, right?
Yeah, and you guys have a different level of understanding and involvement in this process than just the general person. And so I
Right.
think you guys are more informed, you know,
Right.
you're the one that we're sharing information with.
Right.
You're kind of representative of those groups. Otherwise, in other words, yes, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, Mario.
Yeah, I didn't mean that we would like spread it. I mean, we're really,
But it can make it on Twitter, it can make it on social media, and then it can make it difficult for us to reach consensus when people may not see the same question when it's finalized. You know,
Well-
we're saving ourselves some.
These are draft questions. And if a question doesn't make it there, it doesn't make it there. I mean, you know, people, if it's a draft question. it's
I've
a
never
draft
seen DPS issue anything in draft.
question. Well, we are not DPS.
No, I know, but we have
Thank
to,
God we are not.
we have to follow
Nor are we
guidelines.
TEA. And there are no guidelines that I know of that the city council has set at this point for this process.
So,
But ethics of confidentiality,
so Mario, you have a valid point, because people like to weaponize words. Words taken from this conversation or words Kurt and I talk about on the stairwell down back to the truck. I mean, it happens. It's the way people, I'm always watching. So I'm not disregarding the point, but it's a very valid point. But the consensus of the room is that is a preferred process. And so that is what I've written down. I'm sure the three papers.
Yeah, we got two note takers.
yeah, and I agree with that.
I don't know where we are. I'm so lost. What's
The summary in a box that I gave.
Okay, do it again.
Questions go out.
I'm so sorry.
Questions go out to the board.
Okay.
You have X number of days to review them. You bring your thoughts, comments, desires back to the whole.
Let's take this one. Great.
And I agree with that. Just please be ethical with
Yes.
that information that's being entrusted to you.
Well,
Well, and so you mean like have another separate meeting or just provide that input directly back to staff?
The request from this small
Mhm.
body, which is only a representative of the two larger. So once again, this group can't make a decision for the whole.
Yeah.
This is the consensus of the people in the room.
Okay.
That is the feedback from this meeting today.
that the process would be that those questions are sent out to
To you,
everybody,
everybody, yes,
everybody on both.
everybody on the committees.
Okay, and they'd be given 2 days or so to give feedback.
Right.
And then there would be another meeting, there would be a meeting of those people that could attend to discuss that feedback.
That is the request from this body.
And that's wonderful.
Right, and that's why I was just trying to,
We're all
because
doing.
we keep meandering around and saying the same thing.
We have a survey. Perfect. I like that.
I can't help but my
That's
military
consensus.
side, every once in a while just comes out and I'm like, okay, look,
That's good.
this is what I've heard. Can we just agree on these 5 words and move forward?
We've agreed.
So, I think we'll have like a short vote, if that's okay? If we can do that. The only other thing I'll say is, again, this is not meant to be, I don't think the intent is to be like a survey by committee, you know,
right.
give input, let's summarize that input and get it to DTJ, but we're not gonna necessarily have I think the intent is to have like a working session where we're live, you know, editing things.
Yeah.
I've got another concern.
Yeah.
Once it goes out to the entire committees.
Yeah.
And they provide input and then say a few people meet, do they make the decision for the whole
No.
group?
It's just, I think it's just
Just a little
general
extra,
creative and
right.
feedback.
And that was, the point you're making is the point I was making, and that is, this is not a governing body.
Right.
These are people who are passionate about the process,
Mhm.
and the people in this room today are making a recommendation on how to proceed.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that if the downtown committee, only because I'm their own, if that came back to them, they went, no, we're not gonna do that, well, then we have to figure out a different way to do it.
So it's a suggestion box.
Yeah.
That's what, like, this is this group is saying, here's how we would like to proceed.
Yeah.
Great. Elena has that, she will take it forward and let everybody know what comes up.
Yeah, so we're actually gonna be having another committee meeting in August, and we'll pose it to the committee as a whole. and get that feedback. I think that's probably the best to do.
Then how does that fit in the timeline?
So-
Because we're gonna be doing the online surveys in August.
I think what we'll do is I'll go ahead and send out that survey to everyone, get their feedback on it. And because we're actually gonna, so we're gonna be having DTJ come back in town on the 17th and 18th to have in-person meetings with these two committees. That's the email I was gonna send out earlier, but I'll just announce it right now. So one of the things that we heard at council a few weeks ago is the desire to have more in-person conversations with DTJ and really kind of reconnect. And so we're gonna bring them in on the 17th and 18th. 17th will be the comp plan committee meeting. 18th will be the downtown committee meeting. I'm gonna send you a very detailed email with all of this information in it. But essentially that they're gonna come back and we're gonna hear more information on them about where we're at in the process. There'll be some focus groups during that time as well. But at that meeting, I think we'll take the recommendation from the subcommittee and pose it to them and say, hey, subcommittee met, here's the discussion, here's the changes that they made to the documents, here's some additional information that Brand provided. One of the recommendations was to have this new process for survey questions. And then I think we'll do it that way. I think it's probably the best way. So that way we're not making decisions in a vacuum, kind of getting general group because that's probably the fairest too. So that way we're ensuring transparency as well. We're not making decisions for the rest of the committees.
So when they come in on the 17th, are they gonna present us something?
Yeah, so there's going to be a list of topics that we're going to talk about. A lot of those things were things that I think people have been wanting to talk about for a while, and they're on the list of topics, but it's going to be a listening session as well. So we're going to talk about housing, we're going to talk about neighborhoods, we're going to talk about economic development, and we're going to allow for just some general feedback from the committees to the consultants about the process so far, how the process is going, general feedback on issues that we're having related to day-to-day planning and things like that. So we'll have a more detailed agenda as we get closer. But I want to go ahead and send out information about the meeting today, so you guys know to go ahead and save
Do
the
you
date.
think they have anything on paper back there now? I mean, like what their general plans are for NacTogether?
No, the plans haven't been drafted.
So it's
We're
just
still in the
a
initial
blank,
public engagement process. Nothing's been,
blank
They
page?
haven't received enough information to write it.
no, because we haven't done any public input yet. So how can they draft a plan without
I'm just
the public
asking,
input?
I just
Yeah.
wondered if they had a bent, if they had a, a draft plan for when they first flew over NacTogether incidental.
No, there's no pre-plan. All that's going to be driven by the public engagement process. So,
Elena, you talk so fast.
I know I do.
My brain is so slow.
well,
So can you explain to me, if we are gonna do what you said, right? We're gonna send them out, then we're gonna have a meeting of whoever, and it's not the same meeting as with DTJ, right?
no.
It's just a separate meeting.
So, yeah. So this
We can just
survey,
talk about
so the first initial survey that's going to go out in August, we'll go ahead and send that to you now. I don't think that we have time to send it out to you, go back to both committees, get this consensus. We're just going to send it out to everyone, say, hey, here are the questions. Let me know, if you have any feedback.
And
Because
then
I don't want to delay that process any further, but we'll give you guys a couple days, get your feedback, send that back to the consultant so they have it. But I don't think we necessarily have, I don't think we necessarily need to have another meeting like you talked about for this first draft survey. And so.
If the survey is going to go out in a month. No. The survey,
five surveys.
I mean, if DTJ is coming in a month, there's not time.
Not even.
They're actually coming in
Less than a
2
month.
weeks.
What meeting?
2.5 weeks, yeah.
2.5 weeks. Sorry, I mean, within
Which
a month.
meeting can we not have?
So Larry, what I was saying was if we have 2.5 weeks, and I'm talking out loud, sorry, this is how my brain works. If you get the survey questions today, have a chance to look at them. Bring your thoughts and desires back to a committee meeting. And then take the response from that committee back to DTJ or past 2.5 weeks. Right?
Well, as long as they know that. This is just so
So
frustrating.
I'm gonna go back to my question again. What,
I think that
the committee meetings left out of the process. The committee meetings left out of the process.
No, I was just talking out loud. So I didn't say this is or isn't something.
No, I'm just asking, I'm asking that because
So, okay, back
earlier it was said we can't have that meeting. So I'm asking the question, the committee meeting part of the process that we agreed on is now left out.
what I summarized was, this is not a ruling body, that what staff would do, Dana, Elena, and Jessica, would send it out to the committees and go, hey, this is a recommendation on this process. If everybody, and I'm picking on downtown again, if everybody on the downtown committee said, no, we're not gonna do that, well, then that is the majority, that is the consensus of that group. Does that make sense there?
But there's not time for that meeting, right?
We can't even figure out if there's time for the meeting yet if the committee doesn't, see what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah, so, and I'll try to talk slower and repeat what I said earlier, so I think, and again, we'll go around the room and do a poll, but at the next meeting, and I'm gonna actually do a summary of this meeting, so this meeting's being recorded, we'll send out the summary and the recording to all the committee members, and let them know, hey, we met, this is the consensus of the subcommittee, here's what their proposal is, here's a draft of the first community visioning survey that's gonna go out in August. When we meet on the 17th and 18th, we're gonna pose a question to the group if they want to do this new process where we send out a draft, get comments, meet, and then on 17th and 18th, they can have that discussion, as a group. But I think for this first initial survey that we're trying to get out in August, we want to get that out before, the middle of August, essentially. We want to get it out as soon as we can. So I think my recommendation is to go ahead and send it out to everyone, give you guys a couple of days to review it, give me your comments, and I'll send that back to the consultant so they can look at it, try to, incorporate any of it, but it won't be subject to kind of that second group review meeting that you guys are recommending that we're going to take as a question to the committee as a whole.
And
Does that
we,
make sense?
if the whole group approves that, then we can do that second meeting for the other four
For
surveys.
all the other surveys, yes.
Okay, so the reason I asked for the subcommittee to begin with was because of these questions.
Yes.
So will we come back to these questions after all this is done? We've never, I still have a list of all of items and
Yeah.
feedback from people.
Yeah.
So will we, because you're saying this is later, the meeting in the box, when will we get to discuss these particular questions?
Yeah, so,
And you're saying we'll use this process to discuss these questions.
so based on the consensus we heard from the group last time, the consensus was not to revise all the questions, but to add
No,
to the
there was not a
blanks.
consensus on that at all. In fact, if you just look at in fact, you could go around the room and speak to this consensus, but if you look at all of the statements there, that's not consensus. So we didn't even pose that question if we needed to go into individual questions. So that's part of the issue. We can't assume consensus unless we all agree, and as you can see, we're trying to for this meeting.
So, I've heard from a couple individuals that they don't have a problem with the meeting in a box questions, especially in consideration of all the additional public input that we're gonna have that we just talked about. So it's not my decision. I think let's ask the group, do you guys want to include the meeting in a box worksheet in that list of surveys that are gonna be reviewed and then as a group and feedback provided to the committees, like provide that in the recommendation that we take to the committees as a whole?
So we, just remember, we only met for 45 minutes and you talked a lot about process and we have a lot of questions about process. We really didn't even go into the questions in very much depth. So I think we still have to have that discussion. And I've heard from a lot of people that they wanted, Betty, she had very specific questions she wanted to add, and those aren't those general questions. And like these questions about what do you most want to keep, what do you change, and then some of them are negative. She said the question about anyway, all I'm saying is there were who is it who just said they only could do 10 questions? Because, but, because this is so long, so anyway, pardon, is that you, Ann? Yeah. So, and there are ways we can, cut this down. That's what started this. And so we didn't have any consensus at the survey because we didn't go into depth in the survey. We agreed that we wanted to add some open-ended questions at the end.
Yeah.
So there was consensus that we wanted to add, but there was not consensus that that's the only thing we wanted to do in the survey. So, just to clarify.
A suggestion, just so we can move this forward, can you compile some feedback from the interested people and bring it to the 17th, 18th?
Absolutely.
Because I would like to see those
Yeah.
questions and ideas. I did this with a group, I did my first one this week, and I think it was well done. You're not gonna get through it all. I was with a very skilled and passionate group. And they had a lot to say. We did not get through it. So I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I think it's still it's general, it's frequent bias and all that, equitable. But, collect the questions and then we can look at them on the 17th and 18th. And we can then, we'll be together as a whole group.
Well, are we gonna be,
Or will we?
are we gonna be dealing with other checks? So that's my question.
Well, this shouldn't, if we have those ahead of time, it shouldn't take that long.
So one of my big questions, let me just ask you, so if this is too long, I would really like to know from a group, not tonight because we've already gone through the whole meeting, but what's the most important stuff we want to get? So that we all are getting the most important stuff. And so that's really, researchers.
That's a good idea.
We have to, if I were doing this as a group, I'd get up there and say, okay, what do you think are the most important things? Let's label them and see if we can.
So I feel comfortable with that as part of the downtown group that could be compiled and shared.
Yeah, but I think it's gonna have to be a creative process of sitting together because we all would have input about what are the most important.
We could shorten it by, you could send us something that I've got I have a whole copy of it, full of stars and things.
So just to clarify, the way that the meeting in a box is structured is that it's broken down by topics. So if someone just wants to talk about arts and entertainment, that's all they can have a meeting about. If all they want to talk about is historic preservation, that's all they have to talk about. They can kind of pick and choose. They can do the whole thing if they want, but they can pick and choose what they want. And if they don't answer all the questions, they don't answer all the questions. Again, this is meant to be icing on the cake, not integral to the process. Something to offer for people that are interested in, responding to a survey or being in a focus group or coming to a public event. But I think, like Mario said, if you guys will send me your feedback on these, I'll compile them. And then we'll send that out to the group as a whole. And then we'll meet on the 17th when we post y'all's recommendation on this survey review process, then we'll include that as part of the discussion. So I think that's probably the best way to do it moving forward.
Was that the intent initially to only pick and choose what topics of
The idea was to provide flexibility, so you could just provide, you have a meeting in a box on just a specific topic, or 2 topics, or 3 topics, or as much as you want. Now, this worksheet is compiled, so it has everything in here together, but the online live version allows you to just go in and just do one topic or do 2 topics, and so it's meant to be flexible in that
And
way.
you can have more than one meeting too. You're not limited to just one meeting. You don't just get one shot at it. You can do it multiple times. Like with our Main Street board, we did it once last month. We're gonna do it again this month because we didn't get through all the questions that we wanted to do. So you can do it as many times as you want until you get the feedback you feel like you've got.
break down to 5 sessions?
So what I'm gonna ask you guys to do, Kathleen, Larry, you guys, will use either email me your feedback, or if you just have it written, I can take it, scan it, and email it back to you. And I will compile all of that, and so we'll send it to the committees, and whenever we have that meeting, they'll have that information ahead of time, they can review, and then we'll pose the question to the group. Because I haven't heard the same, I guess, type and extent of concerns, so I want to make sure we really get input from everyone on the committees So again, we're not making decisions for the whole small group. Chuck, Chad, you've been quiet. Are you there?
Just listening.
Leave? Okay, give up. I'm stop sharing my screen now so we can see you. Hello. So I think that, just to recap again, see if I can get this clear. We're gonna take a recommendation from the subcommittee to the committees as a whole, the 17th and 18th, about having a process for reviewing surveys. Essentially, sending out surveys, allowing holidays for feedback, scheduling a follow-up meeting for discussion, and then sending back to the consultant. And then the committees can discuss if they like that process, if they don't like that process, if they want to modify that process. And then as part of that discussion, we'll include the feedback that you guys give staff for the meeting in August.
But we're not gonna have another meeting.
Well, I think we need to get the feedback from the committees as a whole before we have another subcommittee meeting.
Okay, but we have a process. We're all, there's consensus about that process. I think that's good. Okay.
Okay, yes,
Great. then.
yes, ma'am. And this is recorded. We've got, note takers, and so we'll make sure.
And there's also a request that it just for us on the selection of focus groups.
Hmm.
How many people per focus group?
Okay.
I mean, like-
He's good for something.
Okay, and then the next question is, however, the initial survey is not gonna follow that process. It's just going to get the feedback. And the meeting of the boss is not gonna follow that process. It's just gonna get feedback.
Well, I mean, it might follow that process depending on the feedback that we get from the rest of the committee. We've already made the changes. We talked about it last time with adding open-ended stuff at the end.
Right, but there was
But-
not a consensus that that's all that needed to be done. I want to make sure that's absolutely clear.
Well, I think there were more people in that meeting than there were in this one. Just based on my observation and going back and watching the recording, I know there was difference of opinion and it wasn't necessarily 20-80 or 70-30, but when we walked away,
You cannot say there's consensus unless people have the room say there's consensus. Because sometimes people don't talk or whatever. You build to consensus. You actually come together. So it's not 70-30 or 80-20 or, I mean, that's the definition of it. So, and the reason I'm saying this is because we're talking about having a whole plan for the whole city based on consensus. So we got to get that term straight.
Yeah,
well, so the term was defined in the initial binder documents that you guys got. We had the orientation, and essentially consensus was majority. Because you're never going to
But
be
then that's
able
not
to get
consensus,
everyone
and that's not
to.
consensus.
That was the definition council came to. And it was, we did, so, because Mario stood up, obviously, stood up and said, let's kind of, here's what we're looking at for this term, so that it wasn't 51%, that we kind of went through different terminology. And said, we're just gonna call it, this is what we're calling this consensus, that was the majority of.
as somebody who teaches it, that's not the definition. So that's number one. Number
I'm not
two,
arguing it is.
then that's a vote. And then we need to take votes so that the vote is clear to everybody. Because when we left the meeting last time, I could not detect a consensus on lots of things.
At the end of the last meeting, like I said, I wasn't present, but I watched it after the fact. There was, I don't know, if it was Jessica or Elena said, okay, this is what I've heard. I'm gonna kind of summarize,
Right.
so everybody kind of on the same
People were
page.
walking out.
And there wasn't a vote, but that was,
People were
that was
walking out the
before
door.
people left. And so that's where, I'm not trying to debate anybody, I promise. I'm just trying to see from somebody who wasn't in the room what I saw.
And I was in, and because I had to leave. So people were walking out the door. And yes, there was a summary, but there was no time to discuss whether that summary was accurate or clear or anything else.
And to get back to Councilman Dellinger's question of, so it's not gonna apply to the current survey or this next survey. This survey is out, right? So the meeting in the box.
Well, no, wait a minute. I thought we were gonna.
No, what? Let me finish what I'm saying. So meeting in the box is out. That one is a living document that's being used, different groups are still there. Then this next one coming up, we have, so let me see if I can get all through this one. So that process has been done. It had very limited feedback. That was the meeting in the box, very limited feedback, very simple. This next survey that's about to come out, Elaine is emailing all those questions out. There will be individual feedback provided. So that's an improvement over the first process. Would you agree? So that we're working towards a better process, what I'm trying to lead you towards. And at the next committee meeting, they will be asked if we can do that for all the future surveys. So you are correct from what I understand is the meeting in the box is not going to go through that same process this small group is asked for. Because it's out, it's already done. This next one's going to have a modified process. And then all future surveys may fall under the process this group is recommending based on what the committee's decided.
And I'm going to point out something about consensus. When this was decided, I thought we were operating on consensus. And then I brought up the question in our steering committee meeting, how is this process going to work to get this decided? And I was elated, is that a good term? For just asking that question. And then Lena explained to me later, well, the consensus process is only for those recommendations that go into the final report. The consensus process was not for this. So I think we need to clarify what the decision-making process is to both committees, so it's clear to both committees what the, and
Can I just say that your mindset is assuming that I want to be that granular at a level for working with a company that's already doing
well, I don't necessarily trust consultants.
And I see that. I see
Because
that.
I've worked with lots of
but-
consultants over the years.
Since we're not the full committee,
But that doesn't really have anything to do with the consultants. That has to do with process in the making.
exactly, but I don't want to be that granular
Well, you may
writing
not want to
survey
be that
questions.
granular, but I was trying to outline what the process of consensus was. And then I was reprimanded for asking that question, which I think anyway, inappropriate for just asking a question about process. But we ended up with this, and there was absolutely no consensus on the steering committee about this. I can tell you that because there's people in this room that didn't agree with it. As I told Lane, I didn't care. I don't really care about that. But what I did care about was the process. If it was supposed to be consensus, it should be consensus. If it's going to be a vote, if it has to be a majority vote, then let's have a vote.
So Elena has that answer per council's directives back whenever the committees were discussed. And that can also be something she sits back out there when it's the definition for that. Because I don't remember, it's been too long.
And I went back and reread the PowerPoint. I didn't bring it with me today, but I went back and reread it to see what it said. And it said decisions were being made by consensus.
Yeah, and the context of those discussions have always been in regards to the proposals that come forward from DTJ with regards to land use and transportation and those different,
Go back to the initial instead of, because that's
Yeah.
been so long ago, unless you have a right to find your recording.
And that's why it's very important, because if we're not going to be writing, if committees are not going to have subcommittees to write things, and they're going to be writing, then we need to clearly know how we're going to make decisions on what they write, whether or not this is appropriate or inappropriate. And if it's going to be a majority vote, then that's fine. But if we're going to say it's consensus, but we're not really going to operate by consensus, then that's not a good process.
that makes sense. We can get clarification on
Just
that.
go back to the root
Yeah.
of it, and that way everybody's clear from the written.
I don't think it's quite as clear, or at least presented to the steering committee in the PowerPoint. I don't think it's quite as clear as you're saying.
We can go back to the council report and watch it.
And maybe it may be a difference between what was decided in council, and I don't think council voted, but what was decided in council and what was presented to the steering committee. So,
That could be there could be a chink in the armor there. I mean, my point is, let's go back to the root of it, figure out the answer.
and I'm very much like you, I'm very focused on process, and I've said that all.
That's
I
why
have a final question, just not on any of it. We're gonna meet on the 17th.
Mhm.
And then it says survey, draft feedback. So they're gonna draft it, this whole document after we meet on the 17th and 18th.
So there's gonna be lots of meetings, lots of committee meetings, lots of
It said one
engagement
final wrap-up
meetings.
meeting.
So, yes, so after all these other meetings where we've had surveys and public input about drafts of the various sections of the plan along the way, once the final draft is completed, and again, these different sections are gonna be completed at different times, viewed by you. That final one will go through another round of public input. And
So
so,
So we don't just see them one time in August, we're gonna meet a bunch more times.
yes,
As the
So I
chapters
have-
are developed, they are distributed to the groups. and reviewed. So by the end, chapters, I'm not playing, but there may have been 10 chapters and you reviewed all 10 of them prior to reviewing every.
So I'd like to make sure I understand this. Don't waste my time on these questions in a box. Those are already in the box, correct?
Correct.
And staff has already decided that. That is not consensus, that's staff decided, they're already done, DTJ and staff, I want that clear.
well, so these were presented these were
That's
drafted,
not accurate.
no,
But it
it's
is
not.
accurate, because, I mean, absolutely accurate, because we said in our subcommittee, wait, we need to take it, we need to look at it, we need to have, but it's already done, so it's not.
So these were drafted by the consultant, reviewed by staff and the chairs and vice chairs of both the committees, provided input.
Okay,
These were presented to both of the full committees during the presentation, open forum. We didn't get any feedback or
that's not true.
comments.
We all
from-
said, we all said we need to, maybe not at the presentation, but in our meeting, we said we need to review those.
At subsequent meetings you did, but not at the initial meeting where they presented this information. And so based on that, we moved forward with it.
Well,
Um,
I mean, the first time I see something, I'm not going to have feedback. I'm sorry, but the first time I'm given something, it's gonna take me a while to sit and look at it and ruminate over it and think about it.
Well, actually, I was reading that the other day, I think you just said it, it's really only the chairman that have any feedback to the DTJ and you. The rules that I read said that the actual board has no power. They didn't say it in that many words, but they said only the chairman and the assistant chairman actually get to feedback stuff.
You're not gonna find that anywhere in the documents that we've distributed to the group and roles and responsibilities. So
Did I dream
so
that?
that's not accurate. Anyway, I don't want to get too off topic. We can sit here and debate all day. I know there's disagreements about the roles and responsibilities of the committees. I think that we can take the recommendations of this subcommittee, take them back to the committees as a whole, compile your comments that you've gathered so far for the meeting in a box.
Oh, we don't need
Include
to
that and-
compile them if they're not gonna change anything. No.
Well,
I mean, why worry about it?
no one's saying
And the reason
they're
I'm
not
saying
gonna.
that was inaccurate was I didn't suggest that things could be altered. I was trying to look at 30,000 foot view and say, we have a survey that's out there. Let's leave this one here, let's work on a process for going forward. But I by no means have said or alluded to, can't still make changes to it. Because when y'all met, the survey was already out. So this group met last time, can I say my point? It was already out there, and then there were changes made. So I'm saying let's not focus on this one, let's focus on a process to fix all. I'm
And-
looking at the process and not trying to.
Well, I agree about fixing all future ones.
And Elaine is saying that we could, if the committees agree, we could use that same process to amend this one again.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
And I said I was interested in seeing.
That's
So
what
is
I'm
that,
saying.
okay, I wanna, okay, so we will look at that again.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that's all I'm trying to.
So where do I read the rules? Because I read that someplace.
Yeah, so you guys all got a binder
What's
with,
in that binder then?
with the resolution that was adopted, with the orientation, we've got recording of past minutes, meetings.
Okay.
If we need to have a recap of roles and responsibilities of the committees on the 17th, 19th, we can do that with the consultant there. That's not a bad idea because there does seem to be some confusion. I don't think that's anything that Dylan would want to get clarification on. So, but it's all out there on public record. all been discussed openly.
So I'll
recorded.
look it up again.
So
I did
very,
read it the other day.
Yeah, there's
They
nothing's
made
been,
I'm a little confused because I thought this subcommittee was established by the steering committee to revise these questions.
well, Kathleen
And-
established the subcommittee,
Do it?
No.
or
I
the,
didn't question.
No, she
or
did
you
not.
requested the subcommittee.
She requested it, but
Yeah.
then it was established by the steering committee. And then, the first time we met, I didn't know the downtown committee was gonna be on it.
I was gonna say that, I was just checking to make sure I do it right. So the downtown didn't have that discussion. I don't know.
No. I mean, I didn't even know the downtown committee was gonna be here until the first time we met. So, but I assume we have recording of that meeting, we can
Yeah.
our minutes of that meeting, so we
Yeah,
could go back.
I think there's a link to
I
the
would
recording.
honestly like to know what the language was that established the subcommittee.
So,
But I thought we were supposed to
Those recordings
revise
are
the questions.
all those recordings should be up on the website so that you can go back and rewatch it for accuracy.
You know, I lived through it.
Well, just to get the accurate language.
I thought we were supposed to revise these questions.
Yeah, it's so the good news is it's all publicly available. That's why we record the meetings. So if there's any question, we can go back and refer to those.
Let's see.
Well, that was what, I mean,
So, and that was our last one.
Later, sorry. Go ahead.
all I was gonna say is that the meeting, the decision, my decision, several people suggested we look at that, and then, we said, okay, let's have a subcommittee.
The coach.
And as a matter of fact, yeah, and as a matter of fact, that's why it was called the subcommittee. You have another document here, you on the DTAC subcommittee agenda. And so that's that's why I keep coming with my ideas about these questions, because of this.
So I'll be sure to send out a link to the video recording and try to identify that section, because it was at the end of the meeting. And I do specifically remember that you recommended reviewing these for potential changes. I specifically identified a couple people to form it, and then it was something that we said, okay, we'll reach out, see if staff will reach out, see if there's any interest in serving on the committee, which is what we did. And based on the interest that we got, we created the meeting. But so I think that's essentially what happened. But
When do you think you'd be able to get answers to these various questions that was brought up today? To distribute back things like the focus groups, the official or unofficial or process of consensus and subcommittee.
so this evening, I'll send out an email about the upcoming meetings, so everyone can save the date. We'll send out updates to the committees, the summaries of the subcommittee meetings you guys have had with the recordings and the minutes. Let them know, hey, here's what was discussed. And then I'll follow up with the answers to these questions. So I want to get that information out first, so I can get that out by next week. Thank you. All right, meeting adjourned. You guys have a good night. It's dinner time.
Pass.
What happens?
Pretty, it fell off on it.
Press.
Have that little asphalt. One of them on